Whiplash. That's the word I would use to describe Vampyr, the brand new game from the makers of Remember Me and Life is Strange. It's a game I initially loved, then hated, and then loved again. I kept bouncing back and forth, not sure where I would ultimately end up. With its ambitious story, conflicted hero, and incredibly atmospheric setting, I have a hunch that this curious adventure game will find a loving audience. But do I like it? Well, it's complicated. There was a moment right at the start where I fell in love with Vampyr. A lot of it has to do with the way that it introduces us to Jonathan Reed, a famous doctor who crawls out of a giant pit to discover that he's been reborn as a vampire. We're just as confused as he is, and not just because we're seeing the desperation and hunger from his perspective. It gave me hope that we'd finally get a game that explores the unique struggles and emotions that come with being a newborn vampire. And you know what? That's pretty much exactly what this game is. We follow Jonathan as he walks around a plague-stricken London, helping survivors and making the most out of a truly terrible situation. Does this mean embracing the darkness by feeding on the people of London? Using your unique talents to work towards some sort of cure? Or finding something in between? In Vampyr, the choice is up to you. No matter how you choose to play it, Jonathan ends up making a big impact on the city. He does this by talking with the doctors, nurses, shopkeepers, and random people on the street, helping the survivors and curing diseases. It's a never-ending tug-of-war where you're constantly trying to keep the city disease-free, which is not exactly an easy task in the middle of a plague. Not taking good care of the people will result in harder enemies showing up, civilians dying, and side quests disappearing forever. It's a stressful balancing act. Now this is just one of the compelling ideas found in Vampyr, and the truth is, the first two chapters hooked me with the storytelling and characters. I loved getting to know everybody and understanding their suffering. I was amazed at the attention to detail found in London and how each part of the city felt completely different. I liked the bleak atmosphere, the morally ambiguous hero, and all the twists and turns. I turned the system off the first night, genuinely thinking that Vampyr could be a real contender for my Game of the Year list. When it came back the next day, it felt like everything had changed. The phrase I would use is bait and switch. Where the first two chapters were mostly introductions and investigations, the third made a hard right turn into combat. Tough, unrelenting combat. This was the point where they started to throw boss after boss at you, mixed with a handful of lame arena battles and a whole bunch of extra guards on the streets. This is the exact moment I stopped having fun in Vampyr. The combat is pretty simple, largely relying on melee weapons, stabbing tools, guns, and your vampire superpowers. You'll hack and slash with swords, hatchets, clubs, and more, while using your secondary weapon to stun the opponents. There are also a number of supernatural powers that you can summon by using your blood, with the idea of feeding on the stunned bad guys when you run out. All the pieces are in place, yet I'm here to tell you that I had a miserable time fighting my way through Vampyr. The problem I repeatedly ran into was for being the guy with superpowers. Jonathan is the very definition of fragile. He'll constantly find himself teamed up on by bad guys who take as much as 75% of his health with each hit. Don't get me wrong, it's not always that much, but I was shocked by how easy it was for our hero to die. And it's often in completely aggravating ways, such as a flaming arrow coming out of nowhere. There were times when it felt like I was spending more time dead than undead. This problem is only amplified by the boss battles. Every single boss in this game has 200, maybe 300% more health than they should. This creates long, drawn-out, and often boring fights where your weapons do almost no damage. And no matter the location or the villain, I found that almost every single boss fight involved me sidestepping a giant circle while waiting to use my superpowers. Wait, did I say that they all play out that way? Well, that's not entirely true. The first boss I ran into in Chapter 3 was a dude with a giant flamethrower in a tiny warehouse. Remember, this is pretty much the first thing I saw after stealthing my way around the first two chapters. So I was floored when I saw that I was expected to fight a guy with a weapon that stretched pretty much the entire length of the arena. And I'm not gonna lie, it got to the point where I started to wonder if maybe I was missing something. And the truth is, I probably did miss something along the way. I had a hard time finding better weapons, and I stuck with my underpowered hatchet for way too long. So there's a good chance that I simply passed up a weapon that would have made this experience 10 times easier. But that's not how my playthrough went, and I spent at least half of the game thinking that I was missing an important detail or something. Now, dying over and over and over taught me a few things about Vampyr. First, it has obnoxiously long load times. I had to wait for more than a minute every single time I died. And it's actually worse than that, because Jonathan returns with almost no blood in his meter. This means that you either have to go out of your way to find people or rats to feed on, which tacks on an extra few minutes every time you want to rematch with a boss. And even if you do get close to winning that fight, there's a chance the game is going to crash on you and you have to start the battle all over again. This happened 3 aggravating times to me. And that's not the only bug. Beyond the unstable frame rate, Vampyr has some issues with the side quests. I ran into one particularly annoying situation where I picked up a box I needed for a mission, only to immediately die. When I came back, the box wasn't there and I wasn't able to complete the quest. I'm not saying this would have made a big difference, since most of the side quest rewards aren't worth the trouble, but I hated leaving it incomplete. Oh, and that reminds me, even with all the side quests to complete, there isn't that much to do in this game. I was genuinely surprised by how little there was going on in 1918 London. I mean, sure, there's a plague going on, and it's not like people are going to go out in the streets at night, but this city is dead, both literally and figuratively. It sure would have been nice to have more to do for those times when you hit a wall trying to beat a tough boss. And did I mention that the enemy AI is laughably bad? They may pack a mean punch, but they're limited in where they can go. There are a bunch of spots where all you have to do is step beyond an invisible line and the bad guys won't be able to see you anymore. Step out and they'll attack. Step back in and you're invisible. Yeah, the AI is pretty bad. The good news is the story is constantly compelling and the investigation stuff worked on me. I wasn't a big fan of the way they introduced seemingly important characters mere seconds before fighting them, but this is hardly the first video game to pull that trick. I found that I was constantly annoyed by how much combat would seep into the missions, and I probably would have liked this game a whole lot more if there was a better balance to the puzzle solving and fighting. And that's the thing. I like the story, atmosphere, characters, and mystery, but I just didn't have that much fun playing it. I had a roller coaster of emotions while playing Vampyr, but not always in the way the game intended. With so much care put into this world and story, I can see this gaining a big following that loves everything that it does. But for me, I found the never-ending battles and lame boss fights to be a real slog. It's also a mess from a technical perspective, souring an experience that I had fallen in love with just a few hours earlier. There's a chance that I'm alone on this one. Hey, thanks for watching our review. So here's the question of the day. What's your favorite Vampyr game? It can be pretty much anything with a vampire in it. So let me hear your thoughts in the comments below. In other news, we're still going to have a new episode of Game Over, the early years, go live this week, but it's going to be delayed by a day or two. I'd normally say that it's worth the wait, but I've seen it, and it's not. We also have a bunch of reviews to get to, so do me a favor and click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,